The card schemes ultimately aren't policing the people that are coming in to the training industry. They're not. There's more than enough trainers to go around. Whether the vast majority of those trainers are competent to be able to deliver that training is another question, really. The quality is being driven by the funding, if you will, and not in a good way. Ultimately, it's down to making a quick buck, and that's why the standards are dropping. The NVQ isn't fit for purpose, in my view.
Have we created our own sausage factory by not addressing our skill shortage earlier?
Yes.
For about as long as I can remember, I've had some serious concerns over the way in which the UK demolition and construction industry trains its workers. But ultimately, I am just a journalist. I don't really have any skin in the game. So when a former industry trainer reached out to me a few weeks ago, I seized the opportunity to learn more. As it turns out, my concerns were far from unique. This is my conversation with Chris Monks. So, Chris, obviously you and I have been talking online. Take me back. What is your background?
Okay, my background started off as a plant operator when I was, 22, something like that. I'm 56 now. 3 CXs, that was my weapon of choice. Worked in the construction industry as a plant operator, ground worker for all my life, really, all my working career anyway, up until 2006, where I ended up going down to Bircham Newton and doing the old CPCS in structural techniques course. And I ventured into training from that point. Wasn't a clean sort of transition into training because it was difficult to get an opportunity. But I eventually got one. And from that point on, up until last May, when I sold my business, I created a business in 2011, a successful training company. We had some really big clients, some big hitters. We were punching well above our weight, I think. But we were known for quality and we were known for doing things right. We did CPCS, obviously, and we did NPORS, and we offered, obviously, other types of training as well, health and safety training. And then the opportunity came along for me to sell the business. I realised that I couldn't do any more with it. I couldn't take it any further. I didn't have the passion, and 1 or 2 personal issues at home meant that I needed to offload it. The plan was to stay on for a bit, really, and develop it with the new owners, but that didn't go to plan. I ejected myself. And that's me, really.
It's interesting you mentioned the fact that you came from a plant operating background, because I know one of your key concerns is the fact that not all plant trainers and testers do actually. I find it remarkable that that's not just a complete almost an unspoken prerequisite. If you're going to teach somebody to do a thing, surely you need to know how to do the thing, right?
You would have expected that to be the case, wouldn't you? It's a difficult one, really, because there's a lot of operators, there's a lot of trainers that have come into the industry over the last few years, and no disrespect to them whatsoever. They're from a military background. Some of them have worked in the engineers, Royal Engineers. They've operated plant, in my opinion, to a completely different operating level to what it would be out on site. And then they've come into training when they've come out of the forces. That's only a small sort of like bracket of the type of trainers that you've got out there. And then there's all these other trainers that just seem to they'll have started off as industrial counterbalance forklift truck trainers, and that is a saturated market, and they've ventured then into to being able to offer items of plant that we've probably never used in anger on a construction site, but they've managed to wangle their way to getting those items of plant on a trainer or instructor card. Yeah, it's mind-boggling. And especially so when you think that both the main card schemes require you to have evidence and proof of 3 years operating experience on the items of plant that you want to add to your remit. Yeah, it's one of those big mysteries, really.
Where does that mystery lie? Is it with the CPCS, NPORS and all these other organisations? Is it higher up the ladder? Is it CITB, who are the umbrella organisation? Or is it a bit of all of those?
It's a bit of all of it, really. Ultimately, it's down to the card schemes. CPCS, I've always been CPCS through and through. That's how I got into the training industry. But then I started offering NPORS because that's what some of our clients wanted. And I modelled what I did on the NPORS scheme, basically around the CPCS model. Operating a piece of plant is operating a piece of plant. It doesn't matter what colour the badge is that you're wearing. You've still got to be able to operate it to a decent standard, efficiently and safely. Safely probably being the first one that I should have mentioned, really. But the card schemes ultimately aren't policing the people that are coming in to the training industry. They're not. They say they do in their policies and their procedures, but from having lived it and having worked in it for the past 20 years, I can 100% guarantee and tell you now that is not happening in a lot of cases. And unfortunately, one of the card schemes is worse than the other. So, yeah.
One of the things that strikes me about this, from an operator's point of view, we seem to have a never-ending cycle of new cards, new renewals. Once you could operate an excavator with a card, now you've got to be an excavator of a certain weight. If you want to go above that weight, you need another test. If you're working with a different type of attachment, that might need another card, and so on. Now, I'm thinking about that from the operator's point of view, but has that had an impact on trainers? Are there enough trainers to go around to teach all of these various cards?
There's more than enough trainers to go around. Whether the vast majority of those trainers are competent to be able to deliver that training is another question, really. There's definitely enough trainers to go around. It's become open season plant training. This is one of the things that kind of killed it for me, really, towards the end. Made me, I don't suppose that. Yeah, it probably did make me a little bit bitter, and other people as well. It just seems to have become the go-to to print money quite easily, and at the expense of the quality of the operators, because you only need to go onto Facebook and other social media platforms and look at some of the horrific pictures and positions that people have managed to put plant machinery in, and it seems to be growing. The standard is definitely dropping with plant operators, and you can put that down to poor trainers. You can put that down to quick, diluted novice training, if you want to call it that. You can put it down to boot camps as well. But ultimately, it's down to making a quick buck, and that's why the standards are dropping, really.
You mentioned the word competence, and I tend to think of competence as it's allied to the operators themselves. But you need competence at the trainer and tester level, surely?
You do, absolutely. And this is why both schemes clearly state in their policies, when you go onto their websites of how to become a trainer, that you must have a minimum of 3 years documented evidence of having operated the items of plant that you wish to train people on. Now, that just sounds perfectly reasonable and normal to me. Why wouldn't you, as we've already said? But it's not happening. People are getting... I've had trainers at my training centre who have asked if they would go and do a certain type of training on a specific piece of machinery. And we've had the uncomfortable conversation whereby they said, I'm happy to go and assess and test, but I won't be comfortable training somebody on that piece of machinery. And then when you get down into the nitty gritty, they've never used one. Then obviously you don't use that trainer anymore, do you?
The comment that I always have on, I'm stealing it from a movie, who watches the Watchmen? Who watches the trainers and the testers?
You've got the monitors, haven't you? So CPCS, I'm not sure of the numbers. They have regional monitors and they come out reasonably regular. They used to come out quite regular to our centre. You could say that's either a good thing or a bad thing, but we never had a sanction in the 20 years that we were operating, or even close to that. We had a good relationship with most of our monitors from CPCS over the years. There's a cracking monitor that covers the Northwest now. They're thin on the ground. Now, National Plant, they've got monitors, but again, and I don't think I'm speaking out of turn here, and I'm not really saying anything that isn't factual, because I've got to be careful. I don't want to get myself into trouble, but they haven't got anywhere near enough monitors to cover the amount of trainers that they are producing on a weekly, monthly basis coming through their scheme, and they never will have. It's impossible for them to have a robust system of monitoring training that's going on. Can't be done.
Whenever we talk about cards and the card schemes, we always talk about spurious cards, people sitting tests for other people.
Yeah.
You can get yourself a CPCS or a CSCS card via Instagram for 800 quid or whatever it might be. How are these non-qualified trainers getting through the system? Is there a similar thing in operation there?
How are they getting through the system? Well, I've been asking myself that question for a while, really. But unfortunately, the documentation that they're producing, I would imagine, that suggests that they have more experience on plant machinery isn't quite as true as it might look on paper. That they're producing backgrounds on machines that they've never operated. And the card schemes are taking it on face value and not doing enough checks. Now, what I will add to that is that, again, and this isn't about me doing a hatchet job on one card scheme or the other. They've both the main card schemes, the CPCS and NPORS, they've both got their issues and they've both got their positives. NPORS has got some really good plus points, but it's also got some bad ones. But the thing for me, the big difference between the two schemes for me is that one of them is operating in a completely different manner to the other, but they're both offering a CSCS affiliated card. So that's the elephant in the room at the moment for me, really, is that one card, CSCS hologram on it, both card schemes offer it, but they both do it very different. Now, that can't be right.
Is one of the problems here dilution? Because
there's too many people offering a card scheme to the plant industry. I think it needs taking right back down to one card scheme. Whichever card scheme steps up to the plate and delivers the best option, I'm not bothered which one it is, really, as long as the standard of training improves and the standard of people doing it improves. But I really do believe there should only be one card scheme. We don't have various different versions of a license for a wagon or a car. It is what it is. It's a license. Now, we know, and we're very careful when we talk about licensing for plant operators. It's not, we've got to get away from that. It's not a license. It's just it's a card or a piece of paper to show that the employer has done what they need to do to ensure that person is capable of operating that piece of machinery. It's their duty under the Health and Safety at Work Act and all the other bits that go along with that. But to have so many different types of card schemes delivering excavator, dumpers, rollers, telehandlers, whatever you want, I don't think that's good for the industry, because it's a race to the bottom, really.
Over the course of 20 years, you will have trained and tested a lot of people. Upon receiving their card, whatever colour it is, whatever type it is,
yeah,
are they competent?
No, they're not competent. This is where the level 2 NVQ in plant operations comes along. But again, that's another story. The NVQ isn't fit for purpose, in my view. I think the sort of beginning of the end for the NVQ that was supposed to prove competency to allow them to get the blue competent operator card, I think the writing was on the wall for that when Train to Gain money came about several years ago, and it became a sausage factory on who could get the most NVQs through, because it was all about the funding and getting the money in. And NVQs haven't really recovered from that. It's widely known that you'll do an NVQ for somebody on an excavator in 2 visits. We used to do them at my centre. I'm not going to say we were squeaky, but perfect, because we weren't far from it. But we ended up in a position where we had to do the NVQs in 2 visits. They were definitely no shorter than that, because with the NVQ, if it's not all going to plan, the assessor is supposed to generate an action plan for additional training. They're not going to do that because they're told not to by a lot of centres, because there isn't enough money in the pot to facilitate any additional training or extra visits. So, no, back to your original question, the test doesn't prove competency. What it does is it shows that you've met a level of safe operating ability to be able to go on to site and at least then start the 20-year apprenticeship, as I say, really. Because you're always learning as an operator.
Absolutely. You mentioned test and training centres. What role do they play? Because I would imagine the quality of those must vary from one centre to another.
Absolutely, yeah. I really, in the time I had my centre, I kept myself to myself. I focused on what I did. So I didn't go visiting other centres, but you hear stories, good and bad. There's some good centres. There's some really good centres out there. Flannery's got some centres that are doing really good work. There's a company just down the road from me, Northwest Services. They've got a cracking centre. And they just focus on plant training. They didn't do what I did and started venturing into other things. They focus on plant because Simon, who runs it, he's a planty, and that's what his passion is. But as well as that, there are some centres around and about that they don't quite do what they should be doing. They dilute the duration of courses. There are strict guidelines on how long a course should take. depending on how many candidates are on it. But you'll see them often advertised on Facebook, 5-day novice courses for an excavator. I don't even know how anybody could keep the face straight typing that onto Facebook, really.
I find it interesting that you just mentioned Flannery. Flannery are a big company and they're a very forward-thinking company. But as an industry, are we not supposed to have the CITB, NPORS, CSCS, CPCS? Are they not supposed to be taking care of the training? And I guess a follow-on to that there are some major projects in the UK, Hinkley Point, HS2, where you need a card basically to get on the site. But the joint venture contractors that are actually running those sites are then requiring you to sit an additional proof of competence. So even the industry itself clearly has very little faith in those cards.
Yeah, I've heard this quite recently, actually. We're quite close to where I am. A plant hire company was insisting that the operators, whether they came with a blue CPCS card or whether they came with a CSCS accredited NPORS card, they were insisting that the operator showed the plant manager or whoever it was in the yard their ability on that machine in the yard somewhere. They weren't taking the cards on face value anymore. And that really is sad, because from my point of view, who actually thinks they're doing some good, it makes you feel as though your credibility's kind of damaged a little bit when you're finding out that they're not trusting the cards when they go for a job. And the other thing as well, I feel a little bit uncomfortable about big plant hire firms, and there's not only Flannery's, but there's small plant hire firms do it as well, that have set up their own training centres to offer training to their own operators. There's something that doesn't sit quite right with me on that one, a little bit incestuous, if you like, in terms of, is everybody going to pass? We need them to pass. We need them out on a roller on Monday on a job somewhere, or we need them out on a telehandler on an housing development. We can't afford for him not to pass the test. So yeah, I struggle to get my head around how some companies are allowed to open their own training centres and train their own people, really. That, again, it's the police in themselves, really. Yeah,
and there's certainly no incentive, as you say, no incentive for them to fail people. They need to get bums on seats, don't they?
That's right. One of the first jobs in training I took on was for a local civil engineering company, and they had a lot of operators, and they had a training company, obviously. So we delivered CPCS, well, CTA as it was at the time. There was pressure on operators passing when they came to the centre. You were asked some very strange questions by the contracts managers and other people if you failed anybody that come from the business. It's a dead simple answer, really. They weren't good enough. I've always worked on this basis that when I'm looking at an operator, if I wouldn't be comfortable working around that lad on that machine, why should I push him onto a site and let other people work around him?
Just going back, one of the issues that we have here, and I want people to be trained, I want people to be safe and competent and effective and productive and everything else. But the industry, apparently, according to the CITB and a bunch of others, we need 250,000 new plant operators within the next decade, 5 years, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
We're in the midst of a skill shortage. Frankly, we've been in the midst of a skill shortage for the 38 years I've been writing about it.
Yeah.
Is that part of the problem here that we have? You described it as a sausage factory. Have we created our own sausage factory by not addressing our skill shortage earlier?
Yes, because the powers that be down in London who need to show that they're changing things, that they're improving people's potential job prospects, and they think the solution, obviously it is part of the solution, they just chuck a load of money at it. Badly thought through training initiatives, programs, producing with rules attached to them that mean you've got limited time to be able to do it because there's limited money for that individual that's on that course, and the incentive is for them to pass. If they don't meet the standard, the training provider, whoever's getting the funding, doesn't get the full funding. It's all got a little bit messy in terms of the quality's being driven by the funding, if you will, and not in a good way. Does that make sense?
It does, and it throws up the question of funding, because we've had an announcement in the not too distant past about the CITB basically cutting some of the, I think it was apprenticeships or some of the training they're doing. So some of the smaller companies that were relying on that kickback of the CITB levy aren't going to be getting it. So you're paying into the system, and when you need it, the system to pay out, it won't. That seems crazy to me.
Yeah. And interestingly, also, somebody told me the other day, I was speaking to somebody that was an endpoint assessor for plant apprenticeships, and he's walked away from that because he doesn't feel that the apprenticeship for operators, plant operators, is delivering the quality and the standard that it should be. Now, he's fairly well respected, this guy. He says that they end up getting their CPCS blue card on a very diluted endpoint assessment test, if you will. They're not even carrying out the full CPCS operator test. So I need to look into that, really, because that doesn't sound right, but that's what he's told me, and he wasn't comfortable with that. So he's walked away from doing the endpoint assessments because he doesn't feel as though a lot of the operators are up to a normal operator standard when they come out of it, which you would hope they would be, really, on an apprenticeship. But again, the money that's available for the plant apprenticeship is poor.
Is part of the problem with this whole training thing, this disconnect? In Ivory Tower, you've got the CITB and NPORS and CSCS, CPA, NFDC, all of these organisations who are very far removed from actual site, the realities of site. I think there's a bit of a lag. If there's a new type of equipment, it takes the training organisations a year, 2 years, 3 years to catch up with that. Are they considering hydrogen engines at the moment? Are they considering the rise and rise of electric? Are they considering the rise and rise of AI? Is there a disconnect between what's happening on site and therefore in test centres and training centres and the upper echelons in their ivory towers?
Yeah, I think there probably is. Yeah, I think that, to be fair, I think there's a disconnect between CITB, CPCS, NPORS and the centres, if I'm being honest. I know, speaking to other providers, that what they're being asked to deliver is one thing, but what actually gets delivered is something else. And I think we talk about CPA and PSRO and these other organisations that have set out this framework of standards for plant training, hence why people like NPORS, one of the partner card schemes with the CSCS hologram on, I think they've stuck their heads in the sand. They know there's an issue there with the quality of training and how it's being done, but I don't know, there just seems to be some reason which we can't quite put our finger on that's stopping them from getting involved and giving it a good shake, because that's what it needs. It needs a good shake up. I'm all for an independent regulator for plant training. I think we need some outside body to come in and have a good look and review the whole sort of plant training industry, really. It's suffering from layers and layers of different initiatives and ideas that have been layered on over the years, and it's all become very bloated and messy. That's how I describe it, really. It needs simplifying.
One of the things that always frustrates me endlessly is we have lots of people talking about the CITB as not being fit for purpose, and I think there's a good argument for that. But every 3 years, the industry is given the opportunity to vote with their feet, basically. They have their census and they decide whether or not the CITB should continue. So for 2 years and 11 months, the industry is saying not fit for purpose, we're not getting value for money, they're not doing a particularly good job, and then the vote comes around and says, oh no, give them another 3 years. And I've been reporting on that for 38 years.
Yeah.
I have to agree. I think there needs to be some sort of independent regulator, but we can't even get past the systems and solutions we've got in place at the moment, can we?
No. And that's very similar to the way that the CPCS, and I don't know whether NPORS do it, but CPCS have regular meetings and get-togethers for people in the industry, plant firms, construction firms, whatever, and also regular get-togethers for providers. And in all the time that I worked in the industry, and I attended a few of these because you had to, the same old dross kept being rolled out by people that were attending, putting the boot in, saying it was no good, blah, blah, blah. But then when somebody like CPCS or CITB or whoever brought out some sort of an initiative to get proper feedback that they could work with and get ideas from the industry to try and change things, the uptake on doing it was very poor. There's plenty of people want to sit there and shout about how bad it is, but they don't really want to get up off the backsides and do anything about it when somebody asks them, what do you want us to do? And that's been happening for years. It's like Groundhog Day.
Is that not where the PSRO, Plant Sector Representative Organisation, is that not where they are supposed to slot into this whole jigsaw puzzle?
That was my understanding. Yeah, that was my understanding. I'm not sure, because some of our concerns that we have with the way that the plant training sector's operating at the moment, we've voiced these concerns to PSRO and to CPA and CSCS as well. And they just seem to want to shut us down, shout us down, whatever you want to call it. They don't really seem particularly interested in what we're saying. And we're living this. Not so much me now, because I've sold up, but I'm still talking to training providers. I still go to providers, and they see it on a day-to-day basis. They see how poor it's being delivered. And I think when you've got, like I said to you earlier on, we've got two card schemes offering the same product, but to vastly different sorts of delivery. All CPCS training centres have invested heavily in a training area, a lump of ground. You don't get 3 acres of ground cheap anywhere, unless you're extremely lucky. And they've invested good money into setting these centres up, that they have to have all these requirements there, just like a well-run construction site has to have all the facilities and welfare facilities. And they're delivering training and assessments in simulated training areas, yeah, but all the conditions to meet the requirements of the test are there on site. No argument. It's all there. You cannot miss any part of that test. I'm not saying every centre does every element of the test, even though they should do, but it's just the way of the world. But the other card scheme, which is offering exactly the same card, is still allowing, or has still been allowed, to go and do a test effectively in somebody's back garden, if that's where the test happens.
See, now, call me naive. You wouldn't be the first, but call me naive. I thought that the whole notion of having two providers, and I realise they're intertwined, but I thought the whole idea of having two providers was to have them competing and therefore raising standards and keeping each other in check.
Possibly that was probably what the idea of it was, really. I don't think that's healthy when we're talking about assessing people's competency on safety critical machinery. They're never going to be able to compete, really. One's a charity, one's a limited company. One, in my view, and this is only my view, one's driven by profit, and the other one's driven by making money to be able to provide the services that it's providing with all the road shows and all the other bits and bats that they offer. I'll say NOCA is a charity when all said and done.
Is that the biggest problem here? The fact that it has become a money-making scheme, a commercial. I was really struck by this when they stripped away the grandfather rights a couple of years ago. It just seemed like there's some untapped potential for profit there. We'll take away the cars. The guys that have been doing the job for 30 years, you now need to prove you can do the job you've been doing for 30 years. That's a cash grab, surely, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's kind of when you're at the front end as the coalface, as we are. We're the ones that hear that on a day-to-day basis from companies and candidates. It's just another money-making scam. It's just a racket, this. And in some respects, you have to agree with them sometimes, but unfortunately, you can't really say that out loud, because then you'd be in breach of your contract that you've got with the card scheme, because you've got to speak of it in only high terms.
The one that always strikes me, and I realise they're two very different things, and I know we're not talking about a licence here. I set my driving test when I was like 22 years old. Yeah. I was a late bloomer. I set my driving test at 22. I'm 61 now. So I've had that card now, or that driving licence, for 40 plus years. I've never had to sit another test. I've never had to go for a renewal. I realise I'll get to a certain age when I'll have to be able to prove that I'm fully competent. Yeah. Yet with the card schemes, they seem to be treating it literally in 5 years' time. You may have forgotten all of this, so you'll have to sit another test. Again, it's a cash grab, isn't it?
Yes. I think the thing with that is both card schemes offer the logbook system for operators. You get your logbook, either digital or paper version, whichever you prefer, and you record your hours. that you're using the machinery. I know a lot of people don't like doing that. The operators don't like doing that. It's a faff. But if they don't record the hours and they don't get the minimum 300 hours per category over 5 years, 300 hours is not a lot of hours really over 5 years. But it will be for somebody that's got maybe 10, 15, 20 categories of plant on the card, and they're probably only using 10% of those machines on a regular basis. That's why you have to be assessed, or you've got to prove that you're using the machinery, because there are categories of plant on people's cards that in some cases they've never used, but they don't use on a regular basis. So you're not using a machine on a regular twice a year. You're not going to be up to a very decent standard on that machine. After you're going to get skill fade straight away if you're not using it very often. So there's got to be some way of clarifying if you're still cutting it on the items of plant. And then if you can't prove the hours in the book, you're supposed to do an on-site assessment. So a tester would come out onto site, or you'd go to a centre and he'd watch you carry out certain tasks with a machine on site.
Given the fact that we've got an industry that has been, at least partly, to a large degree, been pushed into self-employment now, operators now going through umbrella companies or being self-employed and having to run their own books, all of this unfairly penalises those guys. If you're working for a big contractor and somebody's paying for you to go and refresh and take new tests as new equipment arrives and that kind of thing, you're hunky-dory. If you have been pushed into self-employment, you're funding that yourself. That stings, right?
Yeah, it will do. It will do. But I don't know what, I'm going to be a bit out to touch on what the rates are for plant operators these days. But I've always seen it as you're investing in your own future. The self-employed guys are probably going to be in a little bit of a better position than what the employed ones are, I guess. Possibly the rates are slightly better. All right, they don't get the holiday pay and so on and so forth, but that's their choice to be self-employed. It's like any other sort of like sole trader or business. You have to pay for your own tools, don't you? You have to provide what you need to be able to carry out your job.
Breaking all of this down to absolute brass tacks here, the reason that I wanted to speak to you was because I do believe that there are some very serious flaws with the training operations in the construction industry in the UK. And from all that we've discussed, you agreed with that. But what we're trying to provide here is a competent, and you said it yourself, above all, a safe workforce. Given all that you know, given all that you've seen, given all the problems in the background, are we doing that?
Not as well as we should be.
That says it all.
No. Yeah, that's that. Yeah, we're not doing it as well as we should be. We're not sending people to the moon here. We can do that successfully. We're training people how to operate plant machinery and giving them an opportunity to go out onto site and get better, because that's where it happens. When you get out on site and you actually start operating the machine, that's where you get better. You don't get better at a training centre. You just hopefully you get given the sort of ingredients to be able to make the cake when you get out on site.
Given all that we've said, given your experience, if you were made Minister for Construction Equipment Training tomorrow, what does your manifesto look like? What are the key changes you would like to see that would actually move the needle to a safer workforce?
I think the first thing I would do is I would insist that we only have one scheme. And again, as I say, I'm not bothered which one it is, but there's one card scheme. I would also insist that all assessments for plant operators, with the exception of the ones that you just can't practically do at a training centre, if you're using a concrete pump or something like that, or a crusher or a screener, we need to be on a site for that. But that said, any on-site tests should be 100% monitored, but all tests should be done at a training centre. They're the first few things that I would do. I'd limit how many categories that trainers can have on their remit for delivery. It's ridiculous when you look at some of these trainers' cards that have got 30 odd categories of plant on there. That shouldn't be happening. They should have the items of plant on there that they specialise in. I had excavators. That's made the bulk of my card up. Excavators. So there was your 3CXs, your tracked 360 excavators, rubber ducks. And then we have the forward tipping dumpers and telehandler and rough terrain mastiff forklift on there as well. Not a lot really compared to a lot of testers, but that's because that's what I operated when I was out in the industry. I started at a plant hire firm, so I was lucky enough to be able to get a decent selection of machines on my card. But I didn't start going and operating mobile elevated work platforms. I see guys that have got CVs that clearly state that they've worked in groundworks, deep drainage, all the working life on machines. But somehow they'd managed to get 3 years operating experience on a mobile elevated work platform. I don't know whether I was missing something when we were doing the deep sewers, but I don't think we ever used the cherry picker down at trench. So yeah,
you've got to get in and out somehow, I guess.
So yeah, I would limit how many categories to probably a maximum of 5 categories, not including endorsements such as above and below 10 ton, but five separate categories. That's what I'd limit.
We've mentioned safety quite a few times. Unfortunately, we are still one of the biggest killers of people in industry. We are the biggest. Does an improvement in training overcome that?
It's certainly going to go somewhere to helping. It would have to, because if it doesn't, we might as well just pack up. But we all know that operators, they go into a different world as soon as they leave the training centre or they've finished a training course. Even experienced operators, they'll go on site and they'll operate slightly different to the way that it's just like when you're driving your car. Would I pass my driving test now? Probably not. But I think one of the things that probably needs to change is the sort of pressures that are put on plant operators in the industry to meet deadlines and timelines for schedule of works and that sort of thing. I think there's too much pressure put on operators, which obviously then leads them into rushing whatever it is they're doing, and that's where your accidents end up. I think for sure having one sort of standard one card scheme would benefit it totally. I think reducing, we've coined a phrase, some of us on LinkedIn, the white van man. The white van man of plant training is the scourge. That's the disease that's kind of like doing for plant operators. It's a man that will rock up at any site to deliver tests, get there, realise that this site doesn't really quite cut it for doing what I need to see really. But rather than say and have that difficult conversation with the person that's paying him, he'll just do whatever he needs to do to make it happen, but not necessarily meet the standards. So he doesn't risk the chance of not getting his pay or his day rate. And that's kind of something else that needs to be stopped. And making all tests done on centre would probably do that really.
There's an interesting aside to that, because I spend most of my time writing about demolition, and one of the issues they face is you've got main contractors, tier ones, developers, insisting that things like high reach operators are trained, carded, competent and everything else. But the moment you say, okay, we're going to train them on one of your sites, oh no, we're not going to have that. How the hell do you train a high reach operator? You can't train them in the middle of a field. It just doesn't work.
No, that's one of your sort of categories that you're going to need to have a real good think about and do it on site somewhere, or I don't know, I'm saying can't really simulate. It needs to be real work, doesn't it? But it's a difficult one. But when I was delivering NPORS training, obviously we had a scaffolding tower at our training centre for doing telehandler training for CPCS. But you will get companies wanting telehandler assessments on site. And I was always very clear that we will never do a telescopic handler test on a building site. I don't want the responsibility of that operator that I have never seen before damaging that scaffolding tower where there's possibly people working on it around the other side of the house or whatever it might be. I just do not understand how that can even happen, and that happens.
You just mentioned the word simulator. We had a guest on one of my shows a month or two ago who was talking about a Canadian company using simulators to bring operators up to A level and then progressing. Where do you stand on that? Do simulators have a role in all of this?
They do, yeah. I don't think they've got as big a role as what some people might have you believe. I actually had one of the first versions of the 10-star simulator at my training centre a number of years back. I worked with Simon Hogg from 10-star on that. And it was funny, really, because we had it set up for excavator and ADT at the time, but we also had tower crane on there. For some unknown reason, bearing in mind I'm an excavator operator by trade, I spent most of my time on the tower crane simulator, because that really was, that would have some value, I think, for tower crane operators. It's good for identifying whether people have got that hand-to-eye coordination. There's lots of various different programs that you can use with the 10-star version. I don't know about other ones. I'm sure there are, where you'll get a report that's printed off that will tell you how productive you've been, how efficient you're operating the machine, what sort of pressure you're putting on the machine when you're digging, or if you're putting too much downward pressure on. So yeah, they're a good thing to use at the start of the training. You can't get away from the fact that you need to be sat on the seat and feel the pressure through the levers and the different sorts of ground that you might end up pulling through, and obstructions, and then it's all those little things that make the operator, I think. But yeah, there is somewhere for them, I think.
I guess my final question is, I'm not even sure it's a question. The very fact that you've sold your business but you are still talking about this obviously suggests that you have a passion for it. But I guess it also suggests that you don't believe that all is lost, that there is some way back for this part of the industry. Have I got that right?
Yeah, I think so. I pause. I'm not sounding very convincing, really. But over the last few weeks, months, myself and the other guys that have been trying to raise this to a wider audience have started to get a little bit, I would say, demoralised, but losing hope that the powers that be, PSRO and CPA, actually start listening and stop being in denial, because they are in denial at the moment. There's no two ways about it. I am passionate about it. It's afforded me a great career, and I've retired at 56. Not many plant operators can ever say that, but I still love it. I've just renewed my operator card in actual fact, because that's how precious that is to me. Fortunately, I had enough hours to be able to do that properly. I think there is still hope. We just need to get the right people around the table. There needs to be a sit down with the right people, and we need to get it all out there and action some real change. But there's got to be a will from the powers that be, and I don't necessarily think there is at the moment.